A new procedural called Flakes has been added to our texturing toolkit, and I thought we could take a look at it. So I've just got this basic little jello box here, and we'll use this as our object that we'll texture. And I'm going to head over to the surface editor and open up the node editor. I'm going to go ahead and close the surface editor just to make a little room. Okay, and what I'll do is go over to Add Node, 3D Texture, and I'm going to choose Flakes. Now Flakes is the same texture that is being used in the car paint material node. So my suggestion would be take a look at the car paint video so you can kind of see how that's used in that material node. Well, it's been broken out into its own procedural texture so that we can use it outside of that material. Okay, so you can kind of see in this little display here that we've got these random little shapes that are various shades. But I'm going to go ahead and drop it into the color input and do a render. And you can see the pattern. It kind of looks like scales or flagstone or something like that, but it's nice little shapes with various shades. Now, when I first saw this, I immediately thought, oh man, I can use this for some kind of like cobblestone, flagstone type thing, so I'll plug it into the bump. So let me go ahead and just take it off of color and plug it into bump and do a render. Well, we can see something is happening, but because there are no edges to this procedural texture, we're not actually going to see the bump that we're after. So I was immediately disappointed. I was like, well, no, this is going to be perfect for this. Well, once I discovered what we can do to get that bump, then all kind of possibilities opened up. And the way I discovered it was actually James Wilmot. He pointed out something that's extremely important about working with Flakes that you've got to remember. And that is that Flakes lines up perfectly with veins, crumple, crackle, and crust. Okay, so if you use those textures in combination with Flakes, you can get some amazing results. And so what I thought we could do is take a look at that. So what I'm going to do is plug the color into color, and then I'm going to start with something like crust. Okay, so because it's two completely different textures. We've got these kind of boxy, wacky shapes, and then we've got a bunch of dots. Okay, random sized dots. So I'm going to plug that into bump, and let's just add a little bit of width to this. So I'm going to say 50%, and contrast, let's do 40%. Okay, and first I'm just going to do a render so we can see the bump. Okay, and we can see that we've got these random little dots. Okay, and then I'm going to plug the color, I'm going to plug Flakes into the color channel and do a render. Now what I want you to notice is that where every one of those dots is, it just so happens to line up with the different shades of the flakes. This is awesome. Now you could say, well, wait a minute, it's a different shape, so how can I really take advantage of that? That doesn't look all that great. Well, here's what we can do. Because these are the same scale, they're going to line up. So if we wanted to really take advantage of this, what we could do is I'm just going to take crust and I'm going to plug the color into opacity. Okay, so what I'm telling it is I want the flakes texture, I want the shading of the foreground to be controlled, the opacity or transparency of that by the crust. So whatever is white is going to show and whatever is black isn't going to show. So let's take a look at the result. So as you can see, we've now said wherever those dots are, I want it to be bumped, and I also want it to display the flakes, which are going to be various shades here, but we're masking it so it looks like we've got these bumped shapes that are different shades, which is pretty cool. So what I can do is let's just add a gradient. I'm just going to kind of build this up a little bit. I'm going to add a gradient. Okay, and I'm going to plug the color into the input and the color into the color. So now the flakes is driving the gradient. Okay, and the flakes are only going to show up where the crust is telling it to. And then I'm just going to add, let's do blue, let's do a darker shade of blue maybe, and then we'll do a lighter shade of blue. Okay, and so as you can see, the input parameter is ghosted out because it's being driven by this flake. So let's do a render of that. Okay, so we can see that the flakes is what's changing the different shades of that, and the different shades are based off of this right here, this gradient. Okay, and we're bumping it with the crust. So we now can use flakes as an easy way to change up the values, the shades of the texture here. Now what we can also do is just plug alpha over to spec, and then we can have these various shades. Remember, that's just a scalar. That's black and white information, so we can drive specularity with that. And now we've got different values of specularity from the flakes driving right into specular. Okay, so that's one example. Let's do one more example and I'll give you an idea. Remember, the tip that I got from James Wilmot that kind of changed everything for me was knowing that flakes lines up with veins, crumple, crackle, and we just saw that it's lining up with crust here. Let's try it with veins because I think it's going to give me what I was after to begin with, where I was like, oh, I'm extremely disappointed in the fact that I can't bump flakes. So what I'm going to do is just plug flakes into color. Then I'm going to go over to 3D texture and choose, let's see, 3D texture and choose veins. Okay. Again, two different procedurals, but because they line up, let's see what happens. I'm going to plug this into bump. Okay, I'm just going to get these out of the way because we don't need them right now. And let's see what happens. Look at this. We have well, let's see it without the flakes. We have the bump happening from the veins, but because of the flakes, we're getting the various shades on our color. But that is lining up perfect with the veins, which is just too cool. So what I'm going to do is just kind of change this up a bit. Let's change the width maybe a little bit, and let's change the bump amplitude. I'm just going to tone that down some. And for scale, instead of changing this here, knowing that these need to line up, one thing that you might do, let's just see a quick render first. Say we go, yep, that's what I want. I'm getting the various shades. I'm getting the bump that I want. What you might think about doing is taking and going over to add node constant vector, okay, which allows us to do the XYZ scale and plug that into scale into both of these nodes. Knowing that we really want to keep these the same size, what that's going to allow me to do is say, well, I want a smaller size on this, so I'm going to go 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Not that these all have to be the same, but now both of the scales of these were changed because they're being driven by that one node. And so now I know for a fact that the two are going to line up, which works out pretty well. So let's just kind of dress this up a little bit. I am going to go ahead and just get rid of these nodes. We've used them. So let's kind of build this up a little bit. I want to add some more bump. So I'm going to go over to 3D texture and let's try crumple. Okay, knowing that crumple also will line up. But I'm just going to feed bump into bump and then this bump into this bump so that I'm taking advantage of both of these bumps. And with crumple, I like using a negative value. So I'm going to try negative 50. Okay, and let's take a look at this. Okay, so we get I'm just trying to dress up these little stones a bit. So I've got some crumple on that, and then let's just do something to fix the fact that these lines are really straight and maybe we don't want them to be really straight. So what I'll do is go over and let's just add something like, you can do turbulent noise, turbulence. You can actually use anything. I'm just going to use turbulence and see what this does for us. So let's say that the turbulence, I'm going to adjust some of the values. So for scale, I'm going to go down a little bit. Let's just try 0.5. I can always adjust this. For bump amp, I am going to go with a very low value because that is going to be controlling kind of how we're going to break up those straight lines. So I'm going to start with something like 5. And for contrast, I'm just going to jump that up a bit. And let's see what this looks like because we can always go and change it. So I'm going to take this and feed the bump into position, and we could feed the bump from flakes if we want over to the position here. Okay, and so let's do a render. Okay, let's compare because there's a big difference going on here. Let's look at say this area right here, I want you to look at the lines as I go page up to look at the old render and page down to look at the new render, and see how we're breaking up that pattern so that it's not so perfectly straight edge. Now you might like the straight edge, but we have the ability, and we can adjust this all we want. So one last thing to just dress this up, and then I think we'll have a pretty good idea of some of the usefulness of the Flakes procedural. So I'm just going to add a gradient, okay, and let's use Flakes as the input like we did before and plug this into here. And then I'm just going to change this color. Let's go with this dark green. Let's go with a yellow muted green. Okay, something like that. And then I'm just going to kind of lighten that up some. Okay. And let's try this setup. Okay, so now we start getting some kind of lizard scales or something like that. And again, I can always go in and go to the specular channel with the Flakes, so that I can get some spec values on there that is going to line up with the other nodes. So remember that Flakes is based off of the same procedural texture that's being used in car paint. So you're going to want to check out that car paint video so you can see how useful it is there, because it's actually a really amazing material node to do quick like metallic surfaces, especially for cars, hence the name car paint. But then also knowing, now that we know, thanks for me at least, thanks James Wilmot, now that we know that Flakes lines up perfectly with veins, crumple, crackle, and crust, man, there's so many different things we can do. Just making sure that you keep the scale the same for Flakes as with the others. And again, quick little tip on that is just use this little vector constant so that we can change all of them at once right here. So quick look at Flakes in LightWave.